Hello, everyone. I'm going to be focusing, as it regards SMEs, I'm going to focus on the S, on the small enterprises. And as it regards the urban fabric, I'm going to focus also very specifically on small-scale development. You see scale here. You'll hear me mention it several times throughout the presentation. I found that regarding scale, it's necessary to repeat it frequently because people don't think about it. When they hear development, when they hear fabric, they think of one scale only, and that's a large scale. And so in order to get my points across, I have to repeat small scale, small scale, small scale. So I'll ask you now to start thinking about that. I'm a member of the Congress for the New Urbanism in the United States. It's a trade organization for urban designers, urban planners, architects, and it has a lot of accomplishments to be proud of. One of, I think, the most important accomplishments is the reclamation of knowledge that had been abandoned. We heard earlier today about, I think it was a 9,900 year tradition of how cities were settled. The settlement patterns, the ways that they were designed and settled. And in the United States, the Congress for the New Urbanism helped to reclaim that traditional settlement pattern and understanding and reuse of that knowledge. One thing, though, that they have not yet done, and I think is should be next on their agenda, is to reclaim the knowledge of how the cities were physically actually built. And that is in a few ways that I have listed here that I think are very important to this discussion. First, they were built incrementally. We've heard incrementalism discussed in a couple other presentations. What I'm referring specifically to is small increments, small buildings, small lots, done individually one at a time, rather than the larger increments, half block, a full block at a time. That also needs to be done, but we've forgotten about the value of building at an incremental scale. The second is successionally. What I mean here is the idea of starting with only what is needed and what is justified, rather than what we consider to be the climax condition being the starting point. We build something that is simpler, less expensive, easier to do, and when we need something bigger and more expensive, that's when we build it. Also at varying scales, cities need all scales of building and development. The problem, as I'll discuss, is that we have forgotten, we've neglected the smaller scales. So we just assume that everything is going to be built at a bigger scale. Finally, cities were built by locals, in large part because they were built incrementally, because they were built successionally, and also at smaller scales. Locals were able to do the building themselves and to be the owners of those buildings. Yesterday we heard about the extractive sector and the idea that so many buildings are just being considered assets and purchased, owned by outside entities, not just outside of our communities, but often outside of our countries. And having locals be able to build and own these buildings is one way to counteract those forces. I'm also going to talk about the value of small. We had someone named Ann Daigle wrote a paper for us that you can find on our website, leanurbanism.org, that talks about the value of place-based enterprises. And she makes a couple points in here that I'll draw your attention to. The first is that 89% of businesses in the US have fewer than 20 employees. So we're talking about the vast majority actually being quite small. And then the effect that those businesses have on the economy. A local small business returns 52 to 79% of its revenues to the local economy versus 14 for the larger and non-local businesses. I really liked this article that appeared in the Harvard Business Review a few years ago that took small businesses and categorized them into 4 types. You can see those types here in the left column. We have the types of firms, non-employee businesses, Main Street businesses, suppliers, and high growth. And the middle column shows the number of firms that those represent in the United States. Regarding the fabric of the city, I want to focus on the 2 in the center. I think those are the most relevant. Those are the Main Street businesses and the suppliers. What do these offer to a city? You see a small business here in Vancouver. Obviously, they contribute a great deal to the character, not just the physical fabric of the city, but also the character of it. As do these businesses in a neighborhood in Toronto where you have residences that are being converted to small-scale retail. And this little grocery in San Sebastian in the Basque Country in Spain. I suppose that the building type may not be relevant, but it's just so beautiful, it's so cute that I wanted to include it. In the US, we have a lot of main streets that were built very inexpensively, only 1 story. They're not tall, and also they're not wide. They're very small increments, many of them only 20, 25 feet wide. Now, sometimes those were built a few at one time, so those are bays, but very often these were built by individuals, one commercial place next to another, one at a time, allowing the business owners to also own the place where their businesses were located. This image from Delft in the Netherlands shows that even when they're 2 stories or 3 stories, another contribution they make to the physical fabric of the city is the fine grain. That this small increment, these small lots, allow for more physical diversity and also diversity of character, something that's very important to the fabric. Regarding suppliers, there's been a good bit of discussion about that already, so I don't need to go into much detail. I use this image of where my office is located in Little Havana in Miami. Back when Pan Am Airlines had propeller seaplanes flying in and out of Miami, this space housed a business that repaired the airplane engines. And the point that you can't see the context from the image, but it's in a residential neighborhood. The point being that it fit in well. It contributed not only economically, but also to the fabric of this neighborhood. And by the way, there was discussion about the crust of retail and the location a few blocks away from that main street. This building is just 2 blocks away from the neighborhood main street. I'll get into small-scale development now. Small scale, I'll repeat that so that everyone is thinking about it. As I said before, cities need all scales. I'm not suggesting that we neglect the large scale or that we make it more difficult or even illegal. What I'm suggesting is that there's a problem that we focus only on the large-scale developments. And in fact, we've created a system. If you think about the system that regulates development, I'll speak specifically to the United States. Every single aspect, if you think about land use regulations, if you think about building codes for new construction or renovation, fire codes, parking regulations, the bureaucratic processes that are required for approvals, financing, every single aspect, whether intentionally or unintentionally, has been made to favor big-scale projects and placed a disproportionate burden on small-scale projects. The result is that big projects are all that we see built. A lot of the discussion earlier today was about regeneration projects and how we can create a walkable urbanism, and I noticed that every single project mentioned was a big project. Now, that has a lot of consequences to it, which I'll get into in a moment. But first, I'll talk about the value of the scale. What are we losing when we neglect the small-scale projects, or why would we want to make them possible? Well, the first is that small buildings, small projects are more adaptable. We heard earlier about the value of adaptability, the need for it, and so I don't have to get into that. Also, preservation of character. One of the things, a couple people discussed gentrification earlier, and one of the aspects, one of the problems of gentrification is rapid change of character of a community. And if things are built small scale, incrementally, individual buildings at a time, it's easier to manage that change of the character. But then also, you hopefully have locals allowed to participate, which is the last point. They're able to have a say. The people who live there are able to have a say about what the character of a place should be. They also are able to participate in that change and therefore to benefit from that revitalization of their communities. Also, it spreads risks and rewards. If you think about it in terms of an investment, or if you think about it in terms of bets, a smaller number of big projects means that there's a bigger risk when one of them fails. It also means that the rewards for those projects go to a smaller number of people. So if you have a larger number of smaller projects, you reduce that risk, individual failure matters less, and you spread the benefits to more owners of those projects. Excuse me. I've said already scale is critical. This is a point that I'd really like to emphasize, that when you have the same requirements, land use regulations, building codes, bureaucratic processes for approvals, what have you, when you have the same requirements for big projects and small projects, you have to understand that they place a disproportionate burden on the smaller projects. So we're talking not only about the smaller projects, but also the developers, the actors, the builders, the people who are trying to do this. You're making it more difficult for them, and you're going to get less of it. So what's needed? How do we address this? I would suggest two things. The first is that we need to change these requirements. Let's make it so that, let's identify the requirements that impede the small-scale development projects, and let's change them. Let's level the playing field. And let's also recruit and train small-scale developers. Because it has become so difficult, and because we therefore have seen so many fewer projects, we've lost not only the knowledge of it, but we've lost a group of people who would be doing these projects. So regarding training and recruiting these developers, a good example of an organization that does this in the United States is the Incremental Development Alliance. They go around to cities that have identified the value of small-scale development and are wanting to see more of it in their cities, and they help them recruit these small-scale developers from the community, and they have workshops to train them. So I think that's a really good example. So regarding the changing the requirements, that's what the Project for Lean Urbanism is dedicated to. We start with raising awareness, for example, presentations like this, speaking to people like you to help understand the value of small-scale development. We began our project with research. So if you go to leanurbanism.org, you'll see many case studies and position papers that talk about the problems and pose solutions for these. We also commissioned some books. I'll draw your attention to one in particular called The New Pioneers, written by J.P. Favour. We identified examples around the United States that inspired the ideas of lean urbanism, and we commissioned JP to travel around the country, learn about those stories, and tell them in this book. It's a great read, very interesting, very educational. I recommend it to all of you. We're also creating tools to make small possible. Making small possible, by the way, is the slogan for the Project for Lean Urbanism. And the ultimate goal for us is to create tools to enable this. Here's an example. It's called the Lean Code Tool. And the reason that it exists is our organization also publishes a free form-based code. It's a transect-based code that is free for any developer of a large project or a municipality to use, but it requires an entire overhaul of a city's land use regulations. And while we recommend that, the more cities that move from a use-based regulation to a form-based regulation will benefit. But we recognize that the process of the overhaul is very time-consuming, very laborious, and very difficult. So if instead a municipality recognizes the value of small-scale development, the value of lean urbanism, and wants to make it possible in their city, they may be able to just tweak, to just make minor repairs to their codes. And so you see the table of contents here. You have, well, I can't read it from there. Urban form strategies, site development strategies, parking strategies. It tells people where to look in their code, what topics to look for, and suggests changes that they can make for it. The primary tool that we offer is called a pink zone. Does the term red tape translate into other languages, into other countries? Is that a term that everyone is familiar with, red tape? Okay. A pink zone refers to an area where the red tape has been lightened. I made a comment earlier about the difficulty of all of these regulations that have accreted and the need to find safe ways to reduce the red tape. You can go onto the website, find a paper about pink zones that will give you a lot more information about it. I'll just highlight a few things here. The first is that we're writing a manual right now that will be a guide for municipalities that want to create pink zones in their cities. We've also found, though, that many of them would like technical assistance, and so we're going to cities and helping them to create pink zones in their places. Very briefly described, pink zones have 3 phases. We have to begin with an assessment. We have a tool that we've developed called the Lean Scan that identifies these impediments to small-scale development and entrepreneurship, and also identifies assets that are well underutilized in that area. Based on that, we have a workshop where we pre-negotiate new protocols, whether it's land use regulations or building codes. It might be related to finance, to training. Sort of like how a large developer in the United States would go buy a big tract of land and then negotiate with the municipality what the building, pre-approval of building plans that are intended to be used there, what infrastructure would have to be provided. We're doing that negotiation instead on the behalf of many small-scale developers who would not be able to do it themselves in this pink zone area. And then finally, implementation. We create an action plan to actually get these protocols adopted. It may be that an overlay zoning land use regulation would have to be created for the district, adopted by the city council. Also new bureaucratic processes to streamline approvals and so forth, to get them actually implemented, and then to see projects that take advantage of this to evaluate them. See what works, what needs to be changed. What a city gets out of this is a replicable model. They can create other pink zones within their city, or perhaps some of these new protocols can be applied citywide. So I'll leave you with a couple questions about whether small-scale development, whether lean urbanism is possible in your city. First, is the playing field level? The regulations, the bureaucracies, cost and financing, do those place a disproportionate burden on the small-scale entrepreneurs or the small-scale developers? Can entrepreneurs operate without licenses, for example? How difficult is it to get permits to open or expand their businesses? Are they able to own the spaces where they have their businesses? Young people and immigrants, the people with the fewest resources, are they able to open businesses, or are they working for other people? Are they able to have their own places, or do they have to live in multi-generational homes with their family? Are they able to actually shape their communities in terms of economic development or actual physical development? Are they able to participate, or do they just watch other people doing these things? And finally, are the young people, are the immigrants moving in to your city? Depending on the answers to this, I think it'll give you a clear idea of whether lean urbanism, whether a pink zone would be of benefit to your city. Thank you very much.